All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Rhonda Gallant, and on behalf of HR.com, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webcast, Improving Performance and Engagement in a Hybrid Working World, sponsored by Clear Review and presented by Nick Gallimore and Jen Thanis. So if you have questions during the webcast, we ask that you use the Q&A to submit your questions for the presenter. And then as well, the chat is open if you'd like to engage in the chat as well. Just choose from the drop-down box, like all attendees and panelists, if you want to have some engaging conversation. It has been pre-approved, this webcast, for an HRCI credit, so please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive credits. All right, I think that is all of the logistics, and it is now my pleasure. Jen Thanis is going to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rhonda. And as she mentioned, my name is Jen Thanis. I'm an account executive with Clear Review and will be your host today. And our focus will be improving performance and engagement in a hybrid working world. As we're starting to come out the other side of the pandemic, we've begun to look at what's changed over the past 18 months. And we're going to argue that now is the time not to just think about what the optimal home remote split is, but that it's actually time for a radical rethink about the very nature of how we organize work. Today, we have with us the Director of Transformation and Insight of Clear Review, Nick Gallimore. Nick's career has given him the opportunity to support organizations in both the United States and the UK in their people transformation journeys, helping to provide insight and practical support to implement forward-thinking HR processes. He'll be taking you through different perspectives on the future of hybrid working and the critical role that transformational performance management can play. As mentioned earlier, each attendee will receive all of the information today, and feel free to ask questions along the way within our Q&A and the chat session. So from here, I'll hand it over to Nick.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Jen, and a very, very warm welcome to all of you. There's just some really kind words, Jen. I appreciate it. You're right. I have spent the vast majority of my career helping organizations do different things with talent, and specifically hire the best people, and more recently think about how do we get the very best from their people. For those of you who haven't come across us before, Clear Review, we are a performance management software company. Today is not a sales pitch at all, but we'll show a little bit more about some of the philosophy and theory that has gone into our product as we go through today's session. Now, we're here today to talk about hybrid working. But before you think, is this just another hybrid working discussion? There are lots going on at the moment. I'll warn you up front, we're going to be putting our own unique slants on the conversation. You can probably tell as well right now that I'm not based in the States. I'm based over here in what we think is very sunny London right now. And from my perspective, we are this particular session is taking place at a really interesting time. We are, I think, 3 or 4 days now in the UK away from the removal of all legal restrictions that we retained as a result of the response to the pandemic. And we are literally stood, frankly, on the precipice of the birth of true hybrid working. Now, I know the situation in the States is different. I think some of you are probably further along that journey than we are. Some perhaps not quite as far along as we are, but I think the sentiment is the same. Now is really the proof point. It's that moment in time where all of the thinking and talking around the future of work stops, and we need to move into those new times. Now, in many ways, this is the second great disruption to work of the past 18 months. And that first great disruption, that one that saw all of us, or certainly significant numbers of us, I should say, moving from working predominantly on site in an office environment to working predominantly remote. And it seems a lifetime ago now, doesn't it? But if you remember all of the disruption and the change that brought with it, that sudden technology pivot, and what we're now facing and moving into, frankly, feels altogether different to that. The great disruption 2, you might be tempted to call it. Now, obviously, that 18 months that we've been through has been a uniquely challenging time, and it's been littered with speculation about the future of work and what this hybrid model will really look and feel like. And a lot of this discussion, and frankly, a lot of the research, some of which we'll discuss today, has centered on the debate about where and when work will take place moving forward. How long are we going to get to spend in the office? How long are we going to have to spend at home? And rather than really focus on when and where today, we're going to argue that our focus should instead be on how. We're going to argue that in the question of, it's the question of how work happens moving forwards that will give us the real answer to some of the challenges that are presented to us now. And the organisations focusing purely on when and where work happens potentially could miss out on what we think is a huge, huge transformational opportunity and leave them at a competitive disadvantage. I'm going to take you on a journey through some of the systemic challenges that we as HR professionals were dealing with even pre-pandemic. We're going to talk a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted some of those systemic challenges. And we'll argue that now is the time for that radical rethink that Jen talked about. And naturally, because it's what we do, it's because our expertise is, we'll focus in towards the end, specifically on the critical role that the latest thinking and best practice on performance management and employee engagement plays in navigating this brand new world. Now, you might have had a couple of raised eyebrows at something I just said a few seconds ago. I referred to some systemic challenges, but before we get into the future, I would just want to wind us back a little bit and think about the world 18 months ago. And I know that feels like an awfully long time ago now, but actually it's very easy to forget with everything that we've been through that even pre-pandemic, us as HR professionals, we're facing some pretty fundamental challenges with how we were approaching the concept of work. And I'm going to take you through three proof points. The first is engagement. So pre-pandemic, only 35% of our people were actively engaged at work. This is a stat taken from the world's largest ongoing study of employee engagement performed annually by Gallup. Think about that for a minute. That's 65% of our teams who are disengaged at work. And actually, when you get into the data, you realize actually it's been pretty much at that level for an awfully long time, despite the backdrop of a strong macroeconomic environment. It turns out, actually, even pre-pandemic, we simply weren't that good at engaging our people. Sadly, we also weren't very good at hiring them either. In a landmark study performed by Leadership IQ, it turns out that a staggering 46% of all new hires failed in the first 18 months. That's, when I say failed, that's fired, quit, or had a poor performance rating, which isn't exactly a ringing endorsement of our pre-pandemic recruiting practices. And finally, if we look at productivity, which is one of my favorite measures, and productivity, by the way, is critical for growth because growth comes from one of two things, either from increasing the labor supply so we can have more people doing things, or from productivity, which is where we have people doing more things. Actually, when we look at productivity in detail, actually we find what McKinsey called the productivity puzzle. And that is that despite all of our technological advancements, all of our increased knowledge and expertise, the rate of productivity growth is actually slowing. Now, given that birth rates are also slowing, this is a real problem. In 2004, productivity growth was 2.1%. By 2014, it had fallen to 0.6%. So I said systemic issues, and here we are. And I know all this sounds a little bit uncomfortable. It's a bit of a perhaps negative way to kick off today, but it's a really important frame for us to continue this conversation. But actually, even pre-pandemic, actually, we were not very good at engaging people. We were not very good at hiring people. And actually, if we're being really critical, we also weren't that good at getting the best out of people. I've got some sources which back some of this data up, which you'll get when the slides come out. Now, this was the backdrop against which the pandemic arrived. And actually, although if you'd taken me back 18 months to the work I was doing at the time, I probably wouldn't see it this way, because it was I'm sure I have people on the cast today who will agree with me. That was a pretty intense and difficult and challenging period of time, right? But actually, looking back, isn't it interesting to see what's changed? Suddenly, we had companies who previously simply couldn't support any form of remote working at all, suddenly could. businesses were really forced to confront some questions that they'd been asked for a long time about where and when should happen. And they were forced to do so at the policy level. You know, certainly in the UK, for example, it essentially became illegal to ask your people to go to work. So businesses were forced to confront this in a very particular way. And for most businesses and people, actually, this has been a fundamental success. It turns out that an awful lot of businesses and employees think that remote working during the pandemic worked really well. This is a chart from a report done by PwC. And interestingly, at the same time as some of these data points, and there's many other studies that will call out the same thing. If we go back to our friends at Gallup and the kind of ongoing engagement measurement work that they do, along with that move to remote working came the very first rise in employee engagement we've seen for a while. So pre-pandemic, you remember it was 35%, when it increased to 40%, with us now feeling engaged at work. So that business case, if you like, for flexible working seems pretty much a slam dunk. Of course, for some businesses, the pandemic was never just about where and when the work gets done. For those of us working in offices, in professional white-collar environments, quite naturally the focus has been on when and where. But actually some sectors have been forced to think really quite fundamentally about how the work gets done. Think of the hospitality sector, for example, at least in the UK, saw successful organisations pivot themselves really quickly to offer home deliveries, takeout instead of dining in services, or the retail space where moves to e-commerce models were quickly accelerated. These are examples of a much more fundamental change about how work takes place, that for those who are able to adapt quickly to how the work gets done, they would have done pretty well. Those who couldn't adapt quickly, not so much. So I'm conscious of the fact that I've just spoken at you for a while. So, and also I've led into this with a reminder of perhaps times that were not as exciting as what we've got in front of us. So I'm going to switch things up and try and get you guys involved in this, because I'm really interested in understanding what your business is planning to do. So hopefully, fingers crossed, if the tech works, we've got a poll, and I'm going to hand back to Jen for this one.
Thanks, Nick. And here is the poll. What approach is your organization planning to take in relation to hybrid working? Would you all say fully remote, fully on-site, partially remote, employee choice, or at this time, are you still working it out? And we'll give you all just a few seconds to add your answers in here. And I think, Nick, we've seen a big mix of this so far. So I'm very interested to see the about 230 people on here, what the breakdown will be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'll own the spelling error in your poll question there. That was me, in relation.
It's okay, Rhonda. We won't hold it against you.
Thank you.
I would never have noticed if you hadn't pulled it out, Rhonda. If you hadn't pointed it out.
I think we're still waiting. Just a few more seconds here. We just got a chat from Priscilla saying typos happen to the best of us. They certainly do.
Yeah, I saw that too, Priscilla. Thanks. All right. I think we have a great amount of responses. So I'll go ahead and close the poll for you, Jen.
Thank you.
And there you are.
Interesting. So here is the breakdown, Nick, if you're seeing these as well. So it appears at this point from everyone answering that the kind of least amount right now are fully remote with 4%. We're seeing fully on site about 10%, partially remote at 54% with 100 people answering in that manner, employee choice at 11%, and about 21% of the people that answered, about 39, are still working it out. So it's a very interesting approach. Nick, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's fascinating. So we deliberately, and I know you could pick some of the wording in this poll apart, but we deliberately separated partially remote from employee choice for reasons I'm going to explain in a minute. But I think it's super interesting that we've got, let's call it the majority. If we were running an election, it would be a majority, 54% are saying we've got partially remote. Now, partially remote to me, and I know we didn't explain this up front, right? This is a poll just to get you guys thinking. But to me, partially remote entails that there is an intention and a desire to put some form of policy or set of expectations around when someone is in the office, as opposed to employee choice, which to me means we're going to be much more fluid. So very, very interesting. Now, part of the reason I was asking this is because I'm going to give you, I'm quite excited about doing this. I'm going to give you a sneak preview live on the call today into a report that we're publishing later on in the month around hybrid working that looks at this question from the other side. So it looks at the question from the perspective of our people. And in particular, it looks at the desires of the people who work for us and how much time specifically they would like to spend in the office. Now, the piece of work we've done involved us going out to 1,000 people, and we're very specific about who we went to. We wanted to go and talk to people who previously, pre-pandemic, had always been working in an office, but who post-pandemic were going to be coming back or potentially coming back into the office in a hybrid fashion. And we asked 1,000 people, and basically we asked them a bunch of questions, but probably the most interesting question was essentially, moving forward as we come out of the pandemic, how much of your time would you like to spend in the office? This is what we found. And just to explain the graph, because I've realized as I was running through this morning, I've got so many percentages on here that I just want to be really clear what this shows. So down the bottom is the percentage of time individuals said that they would like to spend in the office moving forwards. Now, what I think is really interesting about this is really interesting to see how this ties in with the poll that we've just done live in real time. But firstly, the most interesting thing is of the people we surveyed, only 6% of them said that they wanted to come back into an office full time. That means 94% of the people that we talk to have some form of expectation that a degree of their working week is going to continue to be remote. Now, that's interesting, might not be surprising, kind of comparing that, I guess, to what you guys said you're going to do. I think there's, if I made the notes correctly, 10% companies currently planning to go 100% back on site. So yeah, maybe not too surprising. But the other really interesting thing about this, the way we asked this question is quite deliberate, but the really interesting thing about this is that there is absolutely no consensus amongst everybody else as to what the optimal balance between being at home and being in the office is. And this really raises a question for all of us who are currently working through the minefield that is planning a return to the office program, particularly one that's based around thinking about when and where work gets done. Because frankly, without a consensus, how do we do that? How do we create a policy that doesn't disengage some of our people? How do we make the 6% who want to come back full time as happy and as engaged as the 19% who don't want to come back to the office at all? Thank you very much. And it's also worth noting, by the way, and this ties in nicely with our poll, that the vast majority of people we surveyed are expecting to spend or hoping to spend less than 50% of their time in the office. But the real challenge for us as practitioners is how do we do any of this without rolling back on some of those engagement gains that we've seen and that we talked about. Now, interestingly, the challenge doesn't stop there. And actually, when we dug into some of our survey findings, we realized that the situation is actually even more complicated than that. Because when you look within the data, you realize that even with an individual, even within one specific individual workforce, there is highly likely to be a very significant spread of demand. And I'm going to show you another chart. And this chart splits out the youngest people in our workforce, those 18 to 24-year-olds, from everybody else. So the blue bar is essentially everybody else. The orange bar is 18 to 24-year-olds. And what this shows is that actually, when you look at demand on a demographic basis, our younger employees are far more likely to want to spend more time in the office than they are at home. This is just a sample of the piece of work that we did, but that's pretty much a finding that we find across the whole piece. Actually, what we find is this demand for remote working is as far from being homogenous as you can possibly imagine. And I don't think any of it's necessarily a surprise. If again, if you think about the particular challenges that young people have faced in terms of how suitable their home office setups are, or even, and it's something I'm particularly passionate about, their need for learning and collaboration, because 70% of what we learn is from watching other people. And if you're sat in your bedroom, it's kind of difficult to watch other people. So it doesn't surprise me. But nevertheless, it does speak to a really interesting challenge that we've all got, which is that for some, remote working has got such huge benefits. It frees them from the trauma of a commute to work, and it lessens the burden on childcare. But for others, it's actually been really isolating. It's been very lonely. It's been very difficult. And this data shows that really broad spectrum of employee demand, I think, is particularly challenging for us. And again, for those of us who are thinking about how do we create the right policy that talks about when and where people are going to go and would do the work, this becomes really difficult. And that becomes even more difficult, frankly, by the risks, because certainly in my view, there is a challenge and a potential cost of getting it wrong. One of the really interesting things that I've seen happening over the past couple of months is a number of studies that are looking at what I call attrition debt. And when I say attrition debt, I'm talking about the phenomenon or the observation that there are far more people in organizations right now who are thinking about leaving the organization than the historic norm. To a certain extent, that debt, as I call it, is made up of people who perhaps would have normally left in the period immediately after the pandemic, but who decided not to, because they wanted to wait out, perhaps see what would happen in the market. They didn't have the confidence at that time that the market was strong enough, so they decided to stay where they are. But to another extent, it's people who will go on to be, frankly, put off by a current employer, perhaps not being particularly comfortable with the forward-looking hybrid working approach. And when you look at this phenomenon, you pull out some of the details. The numbers, frankly, they're a little bit scary, I'm afraid. And the main number that comes out, this is based on a report done by the Achievers organisation. It's called the Achievers Engagement and Retention Report. The headline number is that right now, 64% of people are considering moving jobs. Now, 64%, just to put it in context, according to Microsoft did a big work trends index report. This is double what is normal. Okay, job switching intent has nearly doubled. And what I'm certainly starting to see, and I imagine this is being reflected elsewhere, is a significant uplift in the number of job adverts that are taking place. Significant increase in the amount of attrition that I'm hearing about. And interestingly, a significant increase in the number of job adverts that are really highlighting the organisation's hybrid policy as being a key delineator. So, important thing to call out: hybrid working, the approach we take will fundamentally influence our employer brand pretty much overnight, and it will change who wants to work for you and have real ramifications for retention and attraction. So, when we're approaching hybrid work through the lens of considering when and where it gets done, we've essentially got a situation where policy is almost impossible to create. The cost of getting it wrong is potentially significant. And we've got that underlying set of challenges that we had pre-pandemic. So it probably shouldn't be a surprise then. When you look at what other companies are doing, we get something of a mixed picture. Deloitte, for example, they've decided the best thing to do is to let their employees decide. So we will let staff decide when, where, and how they work following the success of remote working during the COVID crisis. They've got a desk booking system that enables you to go book a desk. It's entirely in the hands of their employees. That's the piece in our poll, the separate option we pulled out in the poll. Goldman Sachs are taking, shall we say, the opposite approach. It's been fairly well publicised in the UK, this, but CEO Goldman Sachs came out and said, actually, do you know what? Hybrid working for us is an aberration. We're going to correct it as soon as possible. We want everybody back in our offices. And meanwhile, Apple, when they unveiled their hybrid working plan, which involves an expectation for staff to be in the office for 3 days a week, their staff said this. They said, over the last year, we often felt not just unheard, but at times actively ignored. Meanwhile, back of that, according to McKinsey, actually 68% of businesses don't even have a plan yet. So really interesting, unique times. We find ourselves at the heart of quite a challenging HR equation, okay? When we've got a fundamental shift in how work gets done, shifting talent demands, and these low baseline levels of engagement, this history of poor hiring decisions, that baseline low productivity growth, and this weird, strange, difficult to predict set of talent demands that we've got when it comes to hybrid working. Now, companies who win, right, and there will be companies that win despite all of this, will be companies who can work out how they can create highly engaged, productive workforces, irrespective of where and when the work needs to take place. The question is how. And what we're going to talk about now, is what does the world need to look like in order to make real, true hybrid, really empowered hybrid work? How do we build an environment in which it doesn't matter how long you're in the office, it doesn't make a difference on the outputs that we achieve? I'm going to take you now into an exploration of some ideas and some theory. I'll start with the practical reality of hybrid. Now, this is the problem with hybrid really does seem like a very hard problem to solve if we're looking at it only through this lens of where and when work gets done. Because ultimately, arbitrary rules around when you should and shouldn't be in the office, they're still arbitrary, even if they're allowing remote work. They are therefore very difficult to manage. The minute you have part of your employee base looking to do something different to policy, you need to start thinking about, do we make exceptions here? Do we make exceptions there? Our flexible approaches make it really difficult to plan facilities and office space. So from a real estate location, that's kind of challenging. Technology designed to support remote and virtual working simply wasn't designed for hybrid, right? So how will that meeting go when some people are attending physically and some people are attending virtually? Who knows? And finally, last but not least, what about inclusivity? How do we make sure that people are part of decision making in a hybrid setup? These are some of the challenges, but critical to us, critical to the way that we think about hybrid. We think the way to win is to use a different lens and ask a different question, not when and where, but what is the work that the organization needs to do, and how is the best way to do that work? Now, to do that further, I want to dive for a few minutes into the field of well-being and employee engagement. And I'm going to start by giving you another break from me and my voice and another chance to get involved with the poll. So Jen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Nick. We'll await the next poll, and it should just pop up for everyone. So now we're going to be taking a look at well-being. What effect has the pandemic had on your organization's approach to well-being? Would you say well-being is not a specific focus of your organization, that you've recently started to measure employee well-being through surveys, pulse checks, tools, or other things to put in place new resources and systems to support employee well-being? Or have you already been focusing strongly on well-being before the pandemic? And we'll give everyone a few seconds to answer in here as well. And Nick, this one, I'm certainly interested to see the results as well. I know specifically over the past year, we've definitely seen that change in the focus of well-being. And I think we're going to have a really nice mix of results on this one as well.
100%. We've got some really interesting observations on well-being that we're about to share. So it'll be interesting to see what the audience thinks, for sure.
Absolutely. And we'll await Rhonda sharing the answers. Oh, very interesting. So based on the results, it looks like a lot of people answered, which is wonderful. Thank you for that. We're seeing that approximately 22% is saying well-being are not a specific focus of their organization. 46%, which is about 84 individuals, started saying they're starting to measure that employee well-being through various resources and tools. And 32% of answers, about 58 people, have said they were already focusing strongly on well-being before the pandemic. So I will say, Nick, for me, seeing that 32% were already focusing on well-being, that's almost a higher expectation than I would have seen. So great ways that a lot of organizations have already been really focusing on well-being in their people.
No, definitely very interesting. So we've got, from my perspective, what that means is we've got, firstly, a much higher number than I thought. Frankly, we're already well invested in wellbeing, but for 68% of us, we are relatively early on that journey, which I think is very, very interesting. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to ask about wellbeing is because here at Clear Review, we've been tracking wellbeing activity and employee engagement since the start of the pandemic to really try to understand the impact that the changing work demands have on our people. Now, I'm going to share some data. Now, I'm afraid I'd warn you up front, it is UK data, but it's the best I can do for today. But this is a graph which shows you the number of conversations that took place within our platform. So one of the things you can do in our platform is you can log a conversation as part of a performance management process, and you can log different types of conversations. Now, just to help explain the data, the first lockdown, we had 3 proper lockdowns in the UK. Everybody forced to stay indoors. The first lockdown happened in late March. And what this graph shows is that in a very short space of time, the minute lockdown, the pandemic kicked off, the number of wellbeing conversations, and in particular, the percentage of wellbeing conversations as a total of all conversations, skyrocketed within our platform. Now, it's pretty obvious then that one of the things that changed significantly at the beginning of the pandemic was that wellbeing moved immediately further up the agenda and continues to do so. Now, the second thing that we noticed actually sits within our engagement data that we also capture. Now, just to explain, I'm just going to explain where we get the data from in order to just make sense of what I'm about to show you. But we have a part of our service offering. We've developed a pulse engagement tool. We've developed by a very good friend of ours, one of the leading workplace psychologists, Ian McRae, who developed essentially 3 questions that enabled us to accurately measure what we call work engagement. Now, work engagement, I'll just explain that for a moment. It's kind of fundamental to some of the science here. Work engagement is specifically the extent to which someone is engaged to the work that they do, as opposed to other potential factors of engagement. Now, work engagement is really interesting because it is one of the best predictors of workplace performance. So if you want high performers, you really need people in your organization who deeply enjoy and are satisfied by the work that they do. We effectively ask our users 3 simple questions every 14 to 30 days, depending on how we set the tool up. And this gives us the ability to track effectively over time all of our users' levels of immersion, their levels of energy, and their levels of purpose, in particular about how they feel about their work. And here's kind of what we found. If we take a kind of running jump and kind of running view at engagement since the beginning of the pandemic, and obviously you've got the 3 lines here. Got the blue line which represents immersion. I think it's pink. I'm going to say pink line, which represents energy, and the green line, which represents purpose. And you'll see they'll track each other fairly tightly. Now, again, this is UK data. Bear in mind, we had 3 lockdowns in the UK. But what you can clearly see straight away in this data is the impact that locking down has on people's engagement with their work, how they felt about their work. But you can also see that despite this, work engagement actually recovers pretty quickly towards the end of lockdown. So, for example, that first lockdown from the very left of the graph to kind of June when it was lifted, for example. Now, this suggests that ultimately, when we think about how much we enjoy our work, not the other factors of engagement, lockdown has had an unsurprisingly pretty negative impact on our energy, our immersion, and our purpose. But that actually recovers pretty quickly when we open up. But also the other thing it shows is that the overall trend is down and not up. It's a subtle decline, but nevertheless it is down, and it's a prevailing trend, not just headwinds from the lockdowns. So despite everything I've just said about talent demand, engagement, and some of those systemic issues, The reality is that life in fully remote work, which is what we've been doing recently, isn't actually making us any more engaged with the work that we're doing. So it is although we face a new dawn, a new set of opportunities, one of the things that we might be tempted to do is to keep work like it is now. But actually, certainly in our evidence, it's wrong for us to assume that keeping work like it is now will simply have a really positive impact on work engagement, which is the key predictor of performance when it comes to engagement. So to recap, we have historic engagement and productivity issues, a workforce that wants flexibility but doesn't know how much, businesses who perhaps don't know what impact forced flexibility has had, and this slightly difficult to size potential debt pile if we get it wrong. Now, I know we, as part of the HR profession, we're kind of hoping the hardest days were perhaps behind us, but actually I think the next 12 months look especially challenged. But it is a huge opportunity for companies who can get it right in terms of engagement, productivity, retention, talent attraction. And it's a tough problem. But the reality is, irrespective of where our people are working, a significant majority of organizations today are still relying on quite archaic processes, which were not necessarily designed around hybrid work. So let's get back to the question of how we solve this equation. We believe that hybrid success, getting it right, is not just, will not come from a simple reevaluation of where and when work is done. Clearly, that's important. Having clear set of expectations across an organization about when people can and should, and what the expectations are around where work is done is important, but it's not the key delineator. It's actually the way that we organize the think about defining the work and measuring the work that's going to dictate success. And this actually speaks to the heart of some very, very critical HR processes. Now, in amongst all the data points and considerations and things that we've run through in the polls that we've done, at the heart of all of that are our people. Now, I believe that our people are trying to tell us something, and I believe our people are not trying to tell us that moving forward, we'd like to spend 3 days per week working from home, 2 days in the office, and that every Thursday I need to pick the kids up. I think they're telling us these 3 things. I think, first of all, they're telling us, tell me what the important outcomes are, give me the resources I need, and empower me to get the work done. Because our people have learned that actually, when they had to, they can indeed be remarkably resilient, and they can facilitate all manner of work remotely. They've also learned that actually priorities change very quickly and rapidly. They don't change on an annual schedule. I think our people are telling us, measure my results, not my presence. Our people have learned they simply don't need to be in an office to get your results. So what's the point of forcing them in now? And I think they're also telling us, understand that I will achieve better results when I'm well. They've learned the importance of their own mental and physical well-being and how important this is to success. The question is, have our organizations, because to deliver the employee experience I think our people want, and I think that's what the data is telling us, we need to focus on that how and what the work is, not where and when. I believe that companies who win will think very carefully about how to implement hybrid. And I think they'll avoid creating too many complicated arbitrary rules. And I think instead they will focus on how best to achieve tasks. And it's only when you start to think about tasks that I think the answer really comes through to us. So how best do we achieve tasks either in person or remotely? And I think those companies who can do this will also empower their people to consider the concept of the task. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine you're a recruiter, and rather than asking that recruiter to work from home, to work from the office 2 days a week, perhaps instead we ask them, what is the best way of you achieving the very best outcome for the tasks that you need to do, for those tasks that we know are important? How do we tell you what's the really important things you need to achieve? How do we empower you to achieve the outcomes? Just to take that example a level further, we've all learned that onboarding is possible remotely. For those of you who've tried to onboard staff since the start of the pandemic, it's possible remotely, but is it better done face-to-face? And who makes that decision? I think those organizations that can use that type of thinking to, in this example, empower the recruiter to understand what the important results are and to make the right decisions about where and how that work takes place will be the organizations that will win. And they will focus on some of these challenges instead of focusing purely on hours and locations. And to do all of this, this is where we need to talk about performance management, because performance management has an absolutely vital role when it's done well in helping us define the work, define the results, and understand how we're feeling. The reality around performance management, and I suspect today I'm probably preaching to the converted to a certain extent, but the reality around performance management, that a lot of our traditional processes, that part of that the systemic numbers we shared earlier, were already broken. We know, I'm sure most of us know by now, that annual objectives were not agile enough. We learned that during the pandemic. They simply weren't responsive and reactive enough. They didn't enable our businesses to show the agility that they needed. Many traditional performance management processes are far more focused on pay and reward than they are on actually developing or improving performance. And the reality is that most approaches don't actually lead to either better performance or even particularly very good measurement outcomes. And this has been really exacerbated by what's happened recently. The aim of performance management in our new world of hybrid, if we're going to get our approach to hybrid working right, should be exactly what I've just put on the screen. Modern performance management should help your teams perform better, should save you time, and should help your people feel better about work. And plays, I believe, a fundamental part in getting hybrid correct. The modern performance management, and by the way, when I talk about modern performance management, I'm talking about continuous performance management. I'm talking about the concept that performance comes from the creation of agile goals, it comes from real-time, good quality feedback, and it comes from really great, continual, honest and open coaching conversations between manager and employee. But this version of modern performance management is absolutely critical to unlocking hybrid success when the focus is on the work. Why? Well, number one, it drives clarity on organizational strategy. It tells each and every, and when done right, it tells each and every person in your organization what is important, what work is important right now. Irrespective of whether they're in the office or at home, drives real clarity on organizational strategy. Number two, it drives accountability for results. No matter whether someone's in the office or whether they're at home, they understand what work is important and they understand what the results are, and they're accountable for those results. Success will follow. What all of that added up does is it helps to make real sense of the work. We believe that now, a switch now to continuous performance management will have a far more meaningful impact on defining what the work is and helping us be successful than simply putting in arbitrary rules. And we've boiled this down, and I'll share this with you today, into a 5-step model. We call it the 5-step high productivity model. And this model is a model that any organization can adopt or start thinking about adopting that will drive a significant improvement in productivity, irrespective of where and when people are being asked to work. The adoption of a model like this, and this is our model, it's not the only model, there's plenty of them out there, but the adoption of a continuous performance and engagement management approach should be the backbone of any organization's approach to hybrid. And I'll take a few minutes now, whilst I've got a few minutes left, just to walk you through briefly each one of these steps. The first and critical step is to align all of our deliverables to strategy. What do I mean by that? Well, what I really mean is that if we want to have create a successful hybrid workforce, one of the key things we need to do is really rethink our approach to organizational objectives. This is a lesson I'm sure we've all learned throughout the pandemic. Aligning our people's goals to our organizational goals in an agile way and enabling people to have collaboration within and across teams is a fundamental part of driving hybrid success. Now, I'll stress before I show you the next slide, you don't need a software tool for this. This is about a philosophy. This is about driving a behavior. This is about challenging and enabling, asking the business to think differently about how it sets objectives. But if you did have a software tool, and there are many out there, it's just a screenshot from ours, but I've stressed that there are many out there, this might be how that looks. Every individual, and Jen, obviously this is one of your performance goals, every individual in the business has a really clear set of goals which are aligned upstream to an overarching organizational goal. And the the key to this piece of thinking is to make sure those goals are agile, they're short term, they're not long term, that they can be achieved within a viewable time window, they can be changed, they can be updated, they're not static for a year. That's fundamental. First thing, fundamental to creating a really successful working environment, irrespective of where your people are. The second really key facet is the concept of empowering achievement. Empowering achievement comes from really good quality, regular structured coaching conversations, which are focused on how work is going. You have a set of employees who have a really clear line of sight to what the important work is, and that's kind of step one. Step two, make sure you've got to build towards having an environment where managers and employees can have really straightforward, open and honest conversations. Are any objectives at risk of not being delivered on time? What obstacles are getting in the way? The key is these need to be honest. And a lot of the conversations we have in our organisation sometimes aren't honest, particularly if we know that the output of a particular conversation might influence our performance rating at the end of the year, and therefore how we're going to be paid. How likely are you to be honest about some of the challenges you're facing if you think it impacts your bonus? Probably not. So the key to this is to make sure these coaching conversations are taking place. Again, if you had a technology platform, and it's just a quick screenshot from ours, this is what that might look like, and there are many out there. The third step is to optimize well-being and engagement. And obviously we've called that out today through our polls and through some of the data that we've shared. Workplace well-being and engagement is absolutely critical, and a lot of approaches that we've taken historically are focused on this idea of doing a once a year annual engagement survey, trying to understand and interpret the data, and then trying to think about how we improve it. Frankly, what we know now is that simply doesn't work the vast majority of the time. As Forbes have shown us before, 58% of organisations take no meaningful action after surveys. Not only that, as I explained earlier, and I won't go back into the detail again, conscious of time, when we think about what really engages people, quite often our annual surveys are not focused on the work. And again, there are many tools out there right now that enable pulse real-time engagement tracking. Really, companies who are really successful and really win at well-being and engagement will be measuring engagement on a real-time basis. The fourth aspect of the high productivity model is to really recognise contributions. When we talk about recognising contributions, we're really talking about doubling down on feedback. We know that employee productivity, performance and engagement is 14% higher in organisations that proactively foster recognition. As long as that feedback and that recognition is meaningful, it's clear, it's specific, and it provides the recipient with knowledge of the results of their contribution and is in writing, we know that will significantly drive performance up in your organisation. And again, as an example, lots of ways of capturing feedback across organisations. It doesn't need to be wrapped in a software tool, but it's certainly something that you can do. And the last part of the 5-step high productivity model is to reflect and to revise. Reflect back an action plan going forward. Think about, how do we create an environment in our business where continuous feedback is normal? It enables us to have really good quality reflective conversations between employee and manager to really genuinely understand, okay, you had a really clear view of what the work was. You had a really clear view of how you were getting on with the work. What have you learned from that? How are you taking that forward into your own personal development? And lastly, the creation of really targeted, let's not lose that focus on really targeted personal development goals. I'm very conscious of time, and I know that I think there were potentially some audio issues in that. So I've been hopefully me talking louder has potentially resolved some of those. I hope you've enjoyed and taken some value for that. I think, you know, the kind of last word for me is I think we've all got a huge opportunity to really build on some of the experience that we've had over what's been a really tough time. But it's not just about answering the questions about how long people should be in the office. It's answering some more fundamental questions about the very nature of performance and how we get work done. And with that, I'm going to hand, I think, back to Jen to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Nick, and couldn't agree with you more of what you said. And, you know, in terms of everything today, you can certainly say we've only scratched the surface and we understand there's an opportunity to learn much more. So the screen that you're seeing here, we invite everyone in here to take place in to join our completely free Clear Review Performance Academy, where you can take courses on performance management, share best practices, network with other HR professionals on a global scale. Certainly, I will add in the link to the Academy within the chat, so please feel free to join from there. And then also, I did just see one quick question come through. Will you get a copy of the presentation? The answer is yes. Certainly within the exhibit booth within the presentation, you'll have a link to the slides, but as far as we've seen, you will get emailed all of the information as well. I've added a link to the chat in here when it comes to the specific academy here. And then in terms of questions that we have received, Nick, I think we have time for one or two. So I did see one come through when it comes to attrition, specifically to organizations. We've started to see a spike in attrition in our business as we've developed our new remote office and different working policies. Is this a trend that you've been seeing? Do you have any advice on how to conquer that?
Yes, it's definitely a trend I'm seeing. In fact, this is a bit anecdotal, I'm afraid, but even sitting on LinkedIn last night, for example, as you do when you're sad as me, I spotted a couple of adverts, job adverts, which specifically call out, are you sick and tired now of being asked to go back into the office? Well, come work for us. We'll let you work from home type, employer branding messages. So I genuinely think, and I mentioned it earlier on, that attrition debt issue is probably the big thing coming down the tube for all of us. The advice I've got is to really try and talk to people who are leaving your organization, really double down on exit interview processes, and really try to make sure that when that feedback is about is around policy and what when and where you're asking people to work, make sure that is shared with your senior leadership team, probably more now than ever, because if you're getting patterns of people leaving and it is purely because they're being asked to work in a way that they're not comfortable with, that's probably something I'd be keen to flag, and again try and understand that competitive environment around it.
Awesome. I completely agree with you as well on there. So I appreciate that answer. We have another one for you too, to kind of look into the organizations that have some employees that are a little kind of hesitant to join the office. Do you have any best practices or best approaches based on what you've shared today on the hybrid working model that you would suggest?
I think my best advice, if we've got people who are hesitant, now obviously there are have to be careful because people are hesitant for all manner of reasons. So just to be clear, nothing I've said today or in the model that we propose really talks about making rules around when people should or shouldn't be in. But my best advice is really to try to challenge your employees around what is the best way to achieve the things that you need to achieve. The reality is, for some employees, they may well feel that actually there is absolutely no reason for me to ever go into the office. I can be far more productive at home, and I can perform far better at home. Do you know what? That's okay, as long as everybody understands, well, what is the outcome that employee is trying to drive? How do we measure the outcome? And can we actually demonstrate and see that performance and that productivity is still there? But I think by challenging people to really think, what's the best way to get the work done? So that example I gave you with onboarding, I'm convinced, by the way, that pretty soon we will stop attempting to onboard people remotely, because I think it gives people, frankly, at the bare minimum that you really need when you're joining a new business. It's for anyone who's themselves been through that process, yes, it's theoretically possible. Is it the best way to do it? No, it's not. So if I was in that scenario, if I had someone who was critically involved in the onboarding process, who was reluctant to come back into the office, I would be really talking to them about, well, let's look at how we get the best outcome for the business, and I'd be trying to really encourage my employees to look at it through this is about getting work done in the very best way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree about that, keeping that relationship. We have about a few minutes left here. I have one last one for you that I think talks more about the performance management side of things, Nick. Yeah. Some of the questions that have come through are about promoting the kind of healthy relationship between managers and employees that, say, maybe haven't had conversations before. Do you have any tips or tricks that you could share to really promote that conversational piece between employees and managers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when it's an interesting one. So when you talk to, when you have a scenario like that, when you start to talk to managers in particular, I would say, in fact, I'm going to take that back, employees in particular, I would say, a lot of the time you have, where there's an absence of really good quality conversations or conversations at all, it's because for whatever reason, the manager perhaps isn't particularly engaged, perhaps not, I'm trying not to say anything nasty about managers here, but perhaps not doing what we would like them to do in HR, or perhaps they lack the skills, the experience, the time to get it sorted, whatever it is. So, two pieces of advice. Firstly, I would start to talk about start to talk to employees and really encourage employees, or explain to employees that actually, a conversation can be started by either one of you. It can be started by your manager, but actually it can also be started by you. So you've got a real role to play in that. And actually, we see in the Clear Review platform, we see an awful lot of conversations that are started by employees, not by managers. So there's a part of it's about putting the expectation on everybody involved in that process to have conversations, not just the manager. When it comes to managers, the best advice I can give is go and review some of the templates and the prompts that you've got around conversations, because one of the primary reasons that managers won't do it is that they simply don't know how to structure a conversation. They don't know how to make a conversation work. So go and think about the prompts and the materials and the advice and the training that you're giving them. And I think actually on the Academy, I think we've got some additional suggestions on how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. And couldn't agree more about the Academy. And certainly everyone will have their own strategy. But if you're looking for some additional resources on how to implement performance management, if anyone is interested in taking a look at Clear Review, absolutely feel free to reach out to us. I will be on the chat for the next 2 days as well within the exhibit booth. We'll have some links to the Academy among a demonstration video if you're interested. So we very much look forward to speaking with anyone who may be interested to having that further conversation. We really appreciate the time today. Once again, I'd like to thank Nick for taking us through the presentation, and it's been a real pleasure speaking to all of you today. With about that 2 minutes left, I will hand it back to Rhonda, and once again, thank you all.
Oh, that's great. Excuse me. Thanks so much, Jen. Great job hosting. And Nick, excellent presentation. I'll reiterate that. Thank you so very much. We truly appreciate it. And all of our members, I'm sure, do as well. On that note, I also put a link into the chat. When I close at the session, it's going to pop open in a new browser. There's going to be an exit survey. So just take a moment and fill that out. Your feedback's important to us and the folks at Clear Review. As well, I believe I posted a link for the exhibitors booth for Clear Review, and Jen will be there. So just go pop in there and have a chat with her and the Clear Review team. This is going to be archived on hr.com shortly. We'll send an email once that is ready. Also in that email, and expected about 24 hours, we will also have your credit information in that as well. And anytime you want to go see the credits that you have, just go into your hr.com profile, top right-hand corner, you can see View My Credits. All right. Thank you again so much, Nick. Excellent presentation, and thanks so much for your help, Jen. Have a great day, everyone, and take good care for now.